This afternoon, Vimala will be answering questions from the floor. And we'd like to ask if you would to keep the subject of the questions relevant to this morning's talk or to an experience you may have had during the silence this afternoon.
Shall we wait for a couple of minutes till people are coming?
After this morning's talk, I think all questions are superfluous. But saying that, to be in the silence, to experience meditation as a way of life, it seems to me requires self-discipline. Would you address the issue of self-discipline versus self-indulgence? Self-discipline is a part of the meditative life rather than the hit 'em over the head, harsh concept that self-discipline, at least, has always meant for me.
Is that the only question?
This morning you talked about being skillful and simple with regard to speech and thought. If one works in a situation in a university where thoughts and speech are the coin of the realm, how is one to skillfully do that?
Yes.
I wonder how you would answer the question, who am I?
Yes.
Could you please explain the danger inherent in surrounding oneself with sound?
Yes.
My question is similar to the one comes from the person working in the university. I appreciated very much what you said about simplifying life to maximize the conditions for an inquiry. But I've also been very much influenced by teaching of Teilhard de Chardin, who says that one should bring the spiritual energy right there into the workplace where one is involved in building the earth. And if one has a very intense kind of profession that involves a lot of cerebral time, would you comment on how one could view one's profession?
How one can?
One could look at one's profession as neither an obstacle nor an attachment, but something positive.
Could you tell me the last part of the question? I missed some words.
Well, I would hope to view my profession
Yes.
not as an obstacle or as a mechanism that I've become attached to, but a place where I could make use of the spiritual energy that I get from the science. Can I do that?
Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you could say a few words about the bringing up of children and their education.
Yes.
I wonder if you would address the source and nature.
A little louder, please.
I wonder if you would address the source and nature of compassion.
If what mostly it's all about is staying or living in the present, then what work gets done to assure oneself of a productive future? If there are a lot of questions right now implicit in how that future is going to turn out, in other words.
Don't you think questions should be related to the theme of the talk that was given in the morning? One of you has raised the question, who am I? What would the speaker say about that question? Instead of asking, who am I? Why don't we ask, what am I? What is the nature of the I or the me? It's a bundle of images that I have created about myself as I grew up. Excuse me. A bundle of images that the others have created and I have accepted about me. It's a bundle of images that I have been projecting consciously, intentionally, though inwardly I am aware that the reality of my being is quite different from the image I am projecting. But I project those images for the sake of business, job, the functional role of a husband, a wife, member of a political party, member of an organization or an institution. If you strip the I of all these images, what would remain? Even though we have questions and answer session, you do not expect me to dish out answers from here. The questions are formulated so that we can look at them and understand the nature of the question. It would be quite an authoritarian way just to give an answer in yes and no. One can do it in one brief sentence. But there is great fun in going round the question hand in hand, the speaker and the listener. Look at the question from different angles. Allow the question to open its petals and have a dialogue with it. So it seems to me that what we call I is an amalgamation of images. This is our whole-time occupation. Building up images, projecting them, taking care of them. So if you peel the I consciousness of all the images, what would remain? Would there remain anything? Any entity? Perhaps the name would remain, the name given to me, given to you. The form of the body would be there. But then the word I wouldn't have any content at all, would it? There would be just nothingness. As far as the content of I is considered thought, knowledge or experience, we saw this morning that is all the past. It's inherited by us. Or working upon the past, we add to it and enrich it. It has only conceptual reality. We had exploded the myth of the I being real this morning in one way. And I think we are looking at the I consciousness from a different angle, and even then we arrive at a nothingness wrapped up in images. Nobodyness, nothingness. So when the I is stripped of all the images, what remains is the itness, not the I-ness. It is the life, the wholeness. Call it nothingness, call it the wholeness. So the I gets converted into it. It has the reality. The I is a myth. I may be teaching at university or a school, and I teach the subject which I have studied myself and found was agreeable to my temperament, suitable to my talents. That's the functional role as a member of society that I play, and also as a means of livelihood, perhaps, I take up the job. So I have to be efficient and competent in teaching the subject. It's an intellectual game, acquiring the knowledge, handling the knowledge efficiently, competently, handling it with care, and communicating it to my pupils, students, with great concern and affection for them. So I may do it in the classroom, 2 hours, 3 hours a day. Do I carry the image of my being a professor or a teacher when I am outside the classroom? A surgeon is a surgeon in the operation theater. When he comes out of it, is he still carrying his image of a surgeon and live in that tiny little fragment of surgeonship or professorship? Or when he comes out of the operation theater or the classroom, he is aware of his being a human being. The behavior will change with the awareness of one being a non-labeled or unlabeled human being. So if we can go around with the awareness of that essence of humanity being the same for all of us, and do not get imprisoned by our scholarship, erudition, professional skill. Or do I carry the image, I am a very popular surgeon, I am a very popular professor, very much loved by the students? I can be austere with verbalization in 2 ways. One, by using the speech with mathematical precision and accuracy, not throwing away words. Throughout the daily relationships, am I aware how I use verbalization? If there is accuracy and precision, no exaggeration, no understatements, overstatements, just mathematical precision. There is a beauty in precision, beauty in the clarity and accuracy. So, one way is to be precise and accurate in verbalization. Not to use 10 words where you can communicate the thing in 5. I wonder if you have noticed the elegance and beauty that austerity has, simplicity has. Another way of being austere is not entering into what we call shop talk, gossiping, not to indulge in exposing oneself or participating in this business of gossiping, expressing judgments and opinions about everything under the heavens. Just by reading few newspapers or listening to news on the television, we begin to formulate our opinions, look upon impressions as if they are facts, look upon our reactions as our judgments. So if one verbalizes, when verbalization is warranted, not otherwise. By the word warranted, one implies wherever communication is necessary. Not recklessly, thoughtlessly. But we go on chattering, then words become loose, expressions are loose, and then you have to say, I did not mean this and I meant that, and you have to go on giving explanations, justifying, defending. And thirdly, when one communicates what one understands and does not indulge in expressing beliefs, borrowed conclusions, but shares one's understanding. As you begin to share your understanding, as the speech is faithful to the motivations inside, as the speech has the precision and accuracy, you will see how the strength of speech increases, the integrity of the speech increases. When one has to respond, one is living with people, and people come, my colleagues, my students, my neighbors come and talk to me. I can't control their verbalization. Obviously, I can't. How do I respond to them? Again, there are 2 ways, if not more, of responding. If I get emotionally worked up by what they say, the stupidity, the silliness, if I get worked up and react to the stupidity by getting angry, I'll be wasting my energy. If I see it as stupidity, how can I commit another stupidity of getting angry about it? Because you have limited energy, physical energy. when the body is growing, say up to the age of 35, the bone structure is getting built up. It is understandable if one is reckless about spending energy. But after the age of 35, one has to conserve energy. If meditation, the exploration of another way of living, alternative way of living, is our priority. So one ignores the irrelevant part of the communication of the other person and responds only to the point which has brought him and me, or her and me together. Dodging the exaggerations, the emotional fuss, or the sentimentality contained in the communication of the other person, I stick to the main point and respond to it. But if I get busy explaining to the other person how stupid he or she is, that person is not going to convince at all. The person is not going to get convinced. I might get into difficulty unless it is my child to whom I have to explain, to whom I have to help to grow. That's a different matter. But otherwise, as we go through our days and nights with the people, the same austerity in responding, so that there is no waste of energy, whether you take the action or you respond. It's really silly to get angry or annoyed about the silly stupidities of other people, lack of understanding of other people. How can't you understand? And then you get impatient, you get worked up, you get annoyed. So if one can listen to other people, listen to it totally, not allowing the emotional reactions to come up and pollute the listening. Listen with an inner space, not being in a hurry to judge or to evaluate, to accept or to reject. Then that total act of listening brings about the energy of intelligence out of which one can respond. Yes, sir.
Could you explain how you use the word intelligence?
Pardon, I didn't get it.
How do you use the word intelligence?
Intelligence is an energy that takes in one sweep the objective challenge and the subjective reaction. It doesn't get entangled in the subjective reactions. It can take into its fold both simultaneously and therefore respond out of the awareness of both. Intelligence lifts you up from this level of action-reaction, and it enables one to be aware of the objective and the subjective, one and the same time. It listens to the outer word, situation, challenge, and it observes the reaction that is coming up from within without getting overwhelmed by it, without getting entangled in it, without getting identified with it, and therefore the response is from a different level altogether. It takes quite a lot of time to put it into words, but when the movement takes place, it takes place with an electromagnetic speed of the response, of the awareness. It takes you time to verbalize about it. What did you mean by getting surrounded by sound, Ruth?
This morning you said that the use of sound
Yes.
could be dangerous if one indulged in too much. I have myself been greatly consoled and uplifted and been given energy by playing certain music and sound. And I was wondering if perhaps there is a rule, not a rule, but perhaps I've been overusing it in the past.
Look, I was referring to mantra.
Only to mantra.
I said there is a metaphysics of sound. And this mantra yoga is based upon the study of the vibrational range of every letter. And if you want to chant or use those mantras, then you have to be very precise and accurate. If you pronounce them wrongly, then you are playing with fire, because sound contains the energy of light or principle of fire in it. In that sense, I was saying. Of course, we are surrounded by aggressive sounds when we live in big cities. And as far as possible, consciously, one can avoid exposure to that. Very loud music in the house. This is the age of aggressive sounds, aggressive speeds. That is very simple too, but I think this morning I was going into the issue of mantra yoga, not to wrap oneself with wrong frequencies. Very careful about the use of mantras or chantings.
If one chants them oneself, but it would be all right to play a record or a tape which is correct.
But we don't know if it's correct. We don't know if it's correct. Because those mantras are in Sanskrit language. And we don't know Sanskrit language. It's a very profound language. And the semantics, the phonetics of that language is marvelous. But if the pronunciation is not correct, then instead of doing some benefit, it could cause some harm. Yes, but I haven't finished with other questions yet. Yes?
Before we come to the question, I'm very concerned that you talked about what one could do if one's a university professor or an academic. But somebody who's about to enter medical school, for example, where it's necessary to be a student all the time, basically, when the course of study is very vigorous. For example, after the classes, there might be an additional 10 hours of intellectual work during the day. And so I'm very concerned in the sense that it seems like it might be a big hindrance to stopping the movement of the mind, being able to have the time necessary to sit in silence when you have an overwhelming amount of intellectual work to do. Because it isn't like a professor where you can just go home off and not
What can I say in answer to such a question? Do it after finishing the university education. In the vacations. If voluntarily I accept doing some course, knowing, understanding all the implications of it, I have shouldered the responsibility of doing it, haven't I? I can't change the curriculum. I have to go through all that. So, if I decide to go through it, then I go through it without a grudge. I do not complicate the matters by voluntarily accepting to do it and then carrying a constant grudge and friction against myself. Why did I do it? Why did I do it? Either I leave it. If I can't leave it, then I do it gracefully and thoroughly without the friction of resistance and grudge. Does that help you? One of the questioners had asked something about self-indulgence and self-discipline. Indulgence comes about when one becomes an addict to pleasure. Pleasure by itself is not something bad or immoral or something to be avoided. On the sensual level, there's going to be the beauty of that transitory pleasure. If you run after it and try to create a cage for that pleasure, then you invite trouble. But on the sensual level, when you see things, when you hear words, when you touch things, when you take your meals, there's going to be sensual pleasure that doesn't last. It's not only the everlasting things that have beauty and grandeur. In the contact to an object, in the birth of a sensation out of that contact, even before the contact comes the perception. The pleasure comes to life, the perception, then the contact, then the sensation born of that. The sensation being carried by the nerves to the brain, and suddenly, mysteriously, the interpretation taking place. In all of these steps, the pleasure begins to blossom. And by the time the interpretation has taken place and you have reacted, it disappears as suddenly as it had come. It's great fun watching how pleasure gets born, blossoms, and withers away. If you don't try to hold it, if you don't try to crush the beauty of that contact, that sensation, and that experience of a tenth of a second, don't try to crush it in your holding it, wanting to cling to it or own it. Then it has beauty. But we become so addicted. The thought comes in and says, I had wonderful pleasure or sensation or experience. I would like to repeat it. I would like to have it today, again in the evening, or tomorrow. So I think that indulgence comes about when the mind becomes addicted to pleasure. Some minds get addicted to pain and some get addicted to pleasure. There is an element of sadism in most of the human beings. So they nurse the memories of their physical pain, of their psychological suffering. And you should watch the people when they talk about their sufferings and pains, as if it was something very interesting. But they will tell the same story to dozens of persons, how they had suffered and how they went through pain. They relive the pain and relive that misery, the suffering. And may I go a step further? If they are surrounded by security and pleasure, and if they miss the pain, they will have that uncanny knack of creating pain for oneself. You will see that among the people living in affluent countries, not only here, but in Canada, in West European countries, in Australia, one comes across people, very intelligent, and yet they play this game with life. So, self-indulgence, that is to say, becoming addicted to pleasure. Whatever the kind of the pleasure, whether it is the pleasure that food gives you or sex gives you, smoking gives you or drinking gives you. In addiction, when you get addicted, there is repetition. And that repetition makes the mind dull and the body insensitive. Pleasure by itself does not corrupt the human being. But when, with the help of the thought, the idea of pleasure, we get first used to it, then get infatuated with the idea, then get obsessed with the idea, the attraction, the infatuation, then the obsession. That's how indulgence works. So it damages. It damages the sensitivity. It restricts the freedom. And it makes you dependent upon the objects that give you pleasure. It's not only the drug addicts that depend upon the objects that give them pleasure. We have our specific objects that give us pleasure. People since ancient days realized this, and some of them said, well, let us now go to the other extreme. We'll deny pleasure. In order to avoid indulgence, let us create a cult of denial, self-denial. We'll deny every pleasure. They have done it. The Hindus, the Buddhists, the Catholics, the Muslims, and they create disciplines in the name of religion and spirituality, and they create compulsions for themselves for denying the pleasure. Denial is not discipline. Discipline is something that is accepted by the heart after one has understood it, at least intellectually. You understand something. Supposing you understand that for self-education, one has to go into the issue of one's relationship with diet, with food, with exercise, with sleep. Therefore, you go into it. And then you understand that, say, 8 hours sleep or 7 hours sleep is necessary. And you say to yourself, well, from today, I'll give the body 7 or 8 hours sleep. Voluntarily accepted. Discipline comes only after personally going into the issue, understanding it verbally, intellectually, and accepting that understanding. The heart accepts the intellectual understanding. So there is no sense of coercion, no sense of somebody coercing me or forcing me into that. Discipline requires the willingness to learn. So there is no coercion, there is no force or violence in it, no denial or support. Students of Zen Buddhism, and you might be knowing the story of the 2 monks going for a walk, coming to the banks of a river, and a young damsel was standing there who wanted to cross the river. did not know how to swim. So one of the monks lifted her up, waded through the river, and put her down on the other bank of the river. His companion monk was very much troubled. A monk is not supposed to touch a woman, and he had done. So he was very much troubled about his brother monk, as we are troubled about what our friends do, much more than what we ourselves do. We are in a hurry to transform them before transformation takes place in ourselves. So after half an hour, that brother monk could not restrain himself, and he said, "Look, why did you lift her? It's denied, That which is denied lingers in mind. Why did you lift her?" And the first monk said, "Whom?" "Oh, that woman on the bank." He said, "But I put her down. You are still carrying her?" "I put her down there half an hour ago. You are still carrying her?" When you deny something, the mind revolts against the denial, and in a very stealthy, clandestine way, it carries it. So that's doubly damaging. We have seen how indulgence damages, how denial damages. Discipline is something with a sense of responsibility as a mature person. When you understand something, voluntarily accept doing it. For education. It's the willingness to learn that becomes the incentive for discipline. So there is no rigidity about it, but you go through it every day, every moment, alertly and sensitively. In other words, may I say, discipline is unlearning incorrect things that one has gathered around, and learning what one has understood to do physically on the sensual level. Because the verbal understanding takes place in the brain, the neurological system perhaps gets it, but the whole sensual system, the chemical system, the glandular, the muscular, they remain outside the purview of that understanding. Now one has to train that. One has to educate. So one may say to oneself, I'll go for a walk, or I'll have 2 meals a day, or these are the timings of my meals or going to bed. So not as a compulsion, but as an act of learning, one goes through discipline, which I think is extremely necessary to equip the body, to set the body free of inertia, laziness, sluggishness. So it gets filled to the brim with vitality, with passion, with energy. I think I have forgotten his question. Would you tell me?
It was in reference
Your question, not...
to the moving me.
Pardon?
It was in reference to the moving me that you were talking about this morning, and the fact that mind is always producing thought. And my question is, how do you stay in the present and live fully in the present when there are a lot of future concerns, and mind comes in and schedules a lot of what-ifs or a lot of worries about the future?
What do we mean by future concerns?
Plans.
Pardon?
Plans.
Plans about what?
Doing.
Yes, doing what? No, that won't help. as at this end it comes out in words, it will have to come
I
up.
forgot, right, yeah.
Pardon? Of course, I'll have to plan for the family and make arrangements in food, clothing, shelter. I'll have to do it. Financial arrangements, if I'm going to school, to university, arrange those matters. So, life is to be organized, whatever I want to do. I can't do things in an unorganized way when I'm living in a computerized society. I have to organize it. After having organized, after having created an order of priorities, first I organize the life. Where do I want to live? City, town, country? What do I want to do? What kind of job? Want to do or what is available to me? What does the doing of the job imply in terms of spending energy, time, etc.? I work it out very precisely. And how much time is left for me? So one organizes the life. Then one works out the order of priorities so that the mind does not jump into the future and worry about the future. A disorganized or unorganized person cannot launch upon an important exploration of the beyond or of the alternative way of living, because every second day the person won't know from where the person is going to have his next meal or where he's going to live. If that kind of insecurity is there, or if that kind of disorder is there, I don't think the brain can work in suspense and disorder. It needs a modicum of security, organization that has to be taken care of. If you were in India or in any Eastern countries, where those who dedicate their lives to religious or spiritual exploration are still respected, and they are fed by society, clothed by society, the matter would be different. But I am answering question in Boston, USA, not in India. So, planning, organization, working out priorities is gone through. Now I begin to live. And when I begin to live, I do everything that is required of me with attentiveness, with alertness, with sensitivity. Not being preoccupied with something else, not half-heartedly, not distractedly, but I'm totally present there at that moment. So there is an interaction between what is and myself. If I am preoccupied, if I am inhibited by fear, if I am worried, distracted by brooding, then there will not be any first-hand relationship between that situation, that challenge, that person, and myself. So I'll be totally present. And respond to that challenge or relationship without any reservation whatsoever. With all my energy that is at my disposal, I'll go through it. If that relationship, if that work brings about pain, I'll go through the pain. I'll live through the pain. If it makes me cry, I'll cry. If it brings me some pleasure, and a faint smile flickers on my lips, I'll allow it. I won't suppress it. So you live through the pleasure and the pain. You go through it so thoroughly that there is no need for the mind to turn back to it next moment. You have finished with it. When it came, you received it. When it was there, you met it. You dealt with it with the wholeness of your being. And you went through the consequences at that moment. So you finish with that. And you are fresh again, receptive, open to the next relationship, next situation, next challenge, next moment. This is what we do not do. We carry the pain, the agony, that is to say, the memory of what had happened 5 minutes ago. We drag that memory throughout the day, throughout weeks, months. So what happened in the morning casts its shadow throughout the day over everything that happens. So I can't live freely. I can't enjoy the day. One event in the morning has spoiled the whole thing. But there is an alternative way of living, that you live and you finish with it. So that no residue of the memory of pain or pleasure lingers behind to constitute what you call the subconscious. If we allow that residue of sensation of humiliation, sorrow, insult, humiliation through failure, the misery that we create for ourselves. It's not the act of living that is important for us, but the result of that is important. The secondary things are of primary importance to us. But for a religious or a spiritual inquirer, it's just the other way. He's interested in living. Whether the society, in the terms of society, there is success or failure. It's the living that is important. It's the act of living that enriches your being. Not the heaps of successes and failures, status and respectability. They're all empty. People walk on the crutches of respectability, prestige and status. So, when you live at that moment, you are not preoccupied with the idea of future. You are in the present, with the moment, with the movement, in the relationship. Isn't that simple? Life is very simple if we don't complicate it. Just a minute, sir. Yes, sir.
Analogy, I wonder if you could clarify something. You spoke of silence and thought coming to an end. And you spoke, I believe, of silence as an all-inclusive state. And you see, this gentleman here asks about using the intellect as a professor. This gentleman here asks about intense demand of using the intellect, learning to be a doctor. This woman here asks about using the intellect and the challenges of her occupation. And this lady asks about thinking about the future. But it seems to me that thinking about the future is now. I wonder if you could clarify how the meditative state, being all-inclusive, allows us to do these things, to use the intellect.
Didn't we say in the morning, sir, that out of that wholeness, out of that communion with the energy of intelligence, one lives in society, functions as a doctor or a professor or whatever one wants to do. Because the thought, the me, loses the authority in psychological relationships. It does not function and does not come between, it is not an obstacle or a hurdle in the path of communion with the totality, but we had accepted, we had gone through it yesterday and today, that we have to live as members of society. One takes education according to one's aptitudes and accepts the profession. So one has to use the intellect, the brain, the past, the memory, etc. for that profession. Uses it there very competently and skillfully. But when it comes to psychological relationships, the movement of the same thought structure or the movement of the me becomes irrelevant to it. There you are dealing with a subject like medicine, biology, philosophy, or whatever it is. You have read it and you are explaining it to the students. You are preparing them for engineering or whatever it is. So there you are dealing with the past and using it. Intellect will have to be used. We refine and we sophisticate the intellect. We cannot lapse back into primitivity. But we have to live simultaneously on many dimensions. In one part of our life, we have to use the brain, the intellect, the thought, that mechanistic structure. And we use it skillfully. And on the other level, in the psychological relationships, we are free from the creation of images that the movement of me leads to. We are free of that structure of images to meet people and relate to them. I think we are coming to that subject tomorrow. Isn't tomorrow the subject something about relationship? That's why I did not take it up today. And for the awareness of the whole, the relationship with the universal intelligence or divinity or God or whatever you call it, that movement is irrelevant. So there is silence. One lives in that silence, one lives in that communion, that becomes the abode. And whenever necessary, when the mental movement is necessary, the intellectual movement is necessary, one uses the intellect, the brain, the knowledge, the experience, without ambition, without the sense of competition with others, in a healthy, sane way, for the limited purpose. As soon as the movement of mind or brain is not necessary, one is back into that communion and silence, which is the abode. One lives there. Yes, please.
Could you comment a little bit on the challenge of if you have more simplicity in your life, if you're trying to balance it within a family situation with small children?
Balance of what?
The simplicity in your life when you're trying to balance that with family life and small children.
Yes, and there was the question of education of children also.
Yeah.
we are bringing up ourselves before we can bring up the children. We are bringing ourselves up, aren't we? I wonder if I get her question properly. If we are trying to create a balance, how do we bring about simplicity in life?
That might be something you're talking about tomorrow. I would very
You see, I have difficulty in hearing, that's why I'm asking.
I've been very interested in having more simplicity within my own life, but it's a struggle for me many times to do that within a family, sharing my lifestyle with 3 people, and particularly 2 children that are small, without being selfish or self-indulgent or whatever.
Are you coming tomorrow?
Yes.
Yes. Shall we take it up tomorrow?
That's fine. Thank you.
As far as education of children is concerned, the parents will have to make up their minds whether they want their children to fit into the society, the social, the economic, the political structure. Whether the parents want to enable the children to live in the society as capable members, earn wealth, property, not only a livelihood, that might be simple, but have money, bank balance, some property. Whether they want their children to do that, or whether they would like to help the children to grow up as free individuals, even if they cannot fit into the socio-economic structures of the society. Whether we want them to acquire degrees, go through job-oriented education. What is our idea of security for children? On one hand, we'll say this is a rotten society, sick civilization. We would like our children to go to the schools, colleges, though we don't believe in the educational system. We'll be anxious that they have those degrees and they get the jobs in the same sick and rotten society and have bank balance, a car, a house, and What do we want? It's for us first to make up our minds about it. Then only we'll be able to find out for ourselves how to help the children to educate themselves. We can help them to grow. And education takes place in growth, not in bringing about changes. You can bring about changes artificially without helping the inner growth at all. We can bring about changes in habits, we can bring about polish in the verbal behavior, we can stuff the brains with informations. That has nothing to do with inner total growth and education. What is education for us? Is it enabling the person to live in his wholeness and be related to the wholeness of life in every action, in every word? We are living in an anti-spiritual civilization. A negligible minority feeling concerned about the quality of human life and the miserable plight that we are going through. We are a minority. Wherever we might be, in Australia, America, India, even your India, that so-called holy land. We are much more in a minority in all the developing countries, in Africa, Middle East, Asia, Southeast Asia. So if we have seen the futility of this educational system, the socio-economic, political structure, why do we want to educate our children in the same schools? I am not saying we don't do it, but we must understand why we are doing it. If we don't want to educate them according to the existing systems of education, don't want to send them to schools, then such like-minded people will have to come together, whether they are qualified teachers or they are not qualified teachers, they will have to come together as parents, as having concern for their children, and live together and thrash out the issue of what kind of education they would like to give to the children, how to help the children to grow into the wholeness and not get fragmented in the process of growth. Function as a whole human being, whether the child works as a farmer, a gardener, or does any other job. Sir, if we have the authority of the value structure of present society, we are going to submit our children to the existing schools and colleges and then worry that they don't get proper education, that only the brains are fed with information and the children are sitting before television set for 10 hours a day, etc., etc. Or they are becoming alcoholics, and so on and so on. The whole human culture, values, value structures are in a melting pot. And the explorers of the new, or those who are visited by the revolutionary fervor for a psychic revolution, changing the dynamics of relationships, growing into a new dimension of consciousness, will have to begin from the very beginning with themselves and with their children. Then they will de-school the education. Then they will not be prisoners of the definition that school only education is given in the school buildings. They will not try to push education into some rigid framework of today. You may call me an anarchist when it comes to education. And haven't got a degree in pedagogy, and we are not here to expect agreement from you, but as the question was asked, I came out. Have I left out any question? Have I answered all the questions, or anybody's question left out, except my friends that I'll take up tomorrow? Yes? Your question? Which one?
It's on compassion.
What?
Compassion.
Compassion? What about compassion?
I'm interested in your understanding or your experience as to whether compassion is intrinsic to all of our nature, and what it is, and does it arise as a natural energy in us, and how is it that the movement of it in us connects us is it an active energy in which we connect with other people? Does it contain an interrelatedness? I don't know, I'm just interested in your talking about it. So
Will it not be speculation?
I don't know.
Will we not be speculating about it? We know the world of attachments and detachments. We know the world of convictions and a kindness that is extracted out of convictions, or commitment to ideologies, and the kindness that is generated by the identification with the ideology. We know all that. On the mental or the intellectual level, it doesn't seem possible to have compassion or be compassionate. We begin to investigate on the verbal level. First, see the facts through the words. Understanding the words, we begin to see the truth behind the words. When we perceive the truth that the words convey, the truth is concealed, and one has to peel the words, see the truth. In the understanding, the burden of knowledge is shedded, it falls away, drops away. Understanding leads to humility, and the movement of humility is compassion. One who lives in the serenity of silence moves into the orbit of thought or uses the thought only when necessary, but otherwise dwells in the wholeness of his being, has that tender humility. And when you move into relationship with that humility, with that tenderness, which the awareness of whole life releases in you, then the flavor of that behavior is called compassion. Without vitality, without passion, compassion is not possible. The energy of thought, energy generated by thoughts and emotions, is fragmentary energy. It comes up, it subsides, it withers away. But the energy generated by understanding, released in silence or in meditation, knows no death. There is no ebb and flow to that energy. It's there, ever fresh. Living out of wholeness is living out of that intensity and depth. The movement of the wholeness is passion. But when such a person gets into relationship with others, that vitality, that passion in relationship, expressed in relationship, is called compassion. It's not a virtue of the mind, not attribute of the quiet mind. It's beyond mind. May I say, love and compassion go together, or perhaps they are two names for the same thing, looked at from different angles. Love, the word love perhaps relates to the beingness, and compassion is related to the expression of that being. Five more minutes. Somebody looked at the watch. Yes, more than 5, 10 minutes. Yes, sir.
If there are no more questions,
Pardon?
if there are no more questions, would you want to sing something briefly?
What did you say?
The other night you sang Jagri Talk.
No, sir. Wasn't I singing the whole time? I was singing my song of my life. Yes? These acts of communication are acts of worship for me. And with the thoroughness that one is capable of, all attentiveness and alertness, one goes through this act of communication. You are my temples. And the words are like the flowers that are born in your life that you offer. And what comes to life here in this room, in your presence with this group, may not come to life in some other place with some other audience. It will be different, you know. These talks or communications are so very intense because they come to life, they get born here. It's something between you and me that takes place. They don't belong to me only. They are related very much to the quality of the listening of the audience. So it seems I have solved the question paper.